Hello and welcome to Gut Health. Today we are going to go behind the belly button to catch a sneak peek into the astounding systems and the science of the gut. Eating right is just the beginning of the complex functions in the human body. A healthy gut impacts not just digestion, but nutrient absorption, hormones, immunity, emotions, hunger, and DNA, actually. So the idea behind the Belly Button series is that we're going to shed some light on how all the puzzle pieces work together to form a healthier human. What goes on behind the belly button may just blow you away. So please note, these classes are not a wellness learning series. They don't qualify for an incentive. Unfortunately, right now, those are on hold. But you are going to benefit from attending all the sessions or all the different classes that we're going to offer, but it's not a requirement. We did do the first nutrient and digestion and nutrient absorption class, which took a look at how digestion works to break down food into usable forms of energy, vitamins, and minerals, and how we're absorbed into the body. Don't worry if you missed it. We do have a recording available on our Wellness Classes webpage. Today, we're going to talk about gut health and how it's the body's second brain. It affects so many things and is affected by how we eat, how we feel, and then to some extent, how healthy we are. So we're going to uncover its mysteries and learn ways, most importantly, that you can improve your own gut health. Now, the following class, which will happen over the next couple of months, is digging a little deeper into the microbiome. So as you'll learn today, you're going to want to know about all the different bacteria and the bugs in our body. Turns out we have over 100 trillion of these. Yep, that's with a T. And this complex ecosystem is really important to our health risks and our health conditions. So we're going to learn more about that. Following that, we are going to talk about genetics and epigenetics specifically. So genes play a role in our health, right? Our DNA is our DNA. That doesn't change. Our genetic makeup is what it is. But environment and other elements can actually work to change sort of our genetic predisposition to certain health conditions. So scientific researchers and proof have now found that through epigenetics and epigenes, that the choices we make during our life, our lifestyle can actually affect, reverse, and prevent certain diseases like heart disease and diabetes and all kinds of other things. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to talk about the different kinds of hunger. Now, we all experience hunger, but did you know that we actually experience different kinds of hunger? And we'll learn more about that and how our brain experiences hunger, and then strategies to become aware of what type of hunger we're experiencing, and by that, when and what to eat. So stay tuned for those, and we'll be announcing those over the next few months. Today, we are going to talk about gut health, and it is essential to how we feel, to feeling good, but also to our health risks and the quality of our life in our health. Now, we'll cover some basic definitions. If you have not attended or seen the digestion and nutrient absorption class, don't worry, we'll cover the basics. We'll talk about the gut as our second brain. We'll learn more about gut bacteria and, of course, ways to improve gut health. So the gut, not surprisingly, important for digestion and then digestive health, for our nutrient absorption. Now, this is just sort of the short list of everything that the gut has a relationship with. It's interconnected with our immunity, brain and heart health, emotional health, also our propensity and likelihood of experiencing autoimmune disorders, various cancers, skin conditions, and endocrine disorders, including things like diabetes. So this is just a start. The slide is too small, really, for all the things that it impacts. Now, everything ties in together. This is not a linear relationship. So when we talk about overall well-being, we talk about mental health and sleep and stress, not just gut health, and of course, our genetics. Now, we have gut health here in the middle today because that's what we're talking about, but certainly it is not the only thing that affects these other elements of our well-being. So for example, our gut health and our gut bacteria have a direct impact on our mental health and the hormones that our brain produces. Now, likewise, we also experience, when we experience certain emotions or emotional and mental well-being, it can impact our gut and how we feel in our digestive tract. Sleep as well. Certain probiotics actually create melatonin, which help us sleep. When we have disordered sleep, we may experience certain gut health conditions, right? And stress, of course, very interconnected with gut health, both ways. So let's take a quick look at our anatomy and digestion and our digestive tract so you get a lay of the land. And we'll learn about that second brain and our enteric nervous system. So as I mentioned, food is fuel. Our body needs fuel to run properly. So think about it like a car. A car needs gas, a car needs maintenance, right? It's not going to run. You don't just put gas in it one time. This is something that we do consistently. You don't rotate the tires just one time or change the oil one time. This is ongoing care, right? Just like our body needs important nutrients to perform organ functions and maintain our health. So, you know, we have these vegetables, we have the sandwich you see, some beverages, coffee, but our body can't use this fuel in this form for energy, nor are the nutrients that we get from this food readily absorbable into the body. So the digestive tract processes these foods and liquids so our body can actually use them and benefit from them. Now, our digestive tract, let's see what that is. It starts in the mouth, actually, the moment that we ingest food and drinks and liquids, which are start to break down and then travel down through the esophagus. This is our stomach right here, this U-shaped sac. And then this very long tract of canal here is called our small intestine. And as the food, well, the substance that is mushed up as it travels along the small intestine will then travel up through the large intestine, through the colon, and then expelled through the body. So primarily today, we're going to be looking here at the small intestine and then somewhat through the large intestine as well. So the small intestine is the primary spot where we absorb our nutrients. And if you see this coiled up, this is very long. It's actually, if you uncoiled it and laid it flat, it would be over 20 feet long. That's amazing, right? And the reason that it's so long is because we need that surface area to allow for the breakdown of food and the optimal absorption of vitamins, minerals, and then the reduced forms of our carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So think about this length, even just by how long it is, clues us into how complicated and lengthy this process is. If we take a look at this list of vitamins, minerals, and of course like our cholesterol, our fat, we see that most of it does absorb in the small intestine. There are a few things that happen in the stomach, like alcohol starts to break down in the stomach, and then sodium, potassium, and water in the colon, but most of that takes place in the small intestine. So Nutrient absorption here. Now, if we sort of sever the small intestine, here's what that would look like inside. Our body moves that food, or that small intestine moves that food along that very long canal with multiple layers of muscle that contract and then move the food along. Now, we want to pay particular attention here to these tiny hair-like projections called villi. And if you recall, I just talked about the immense surface area of the digestive tract. Well, guess what? The villi actually create more surface area because that shape increases the surface area in the gut and allows for even more, and is extremely important in the process of absorption, and also absorption and the passing through of that into our circulatory system, etc. So those nutrients and energy can travel to the correct organs. Now, even smaller are these little projections, have even smaller projections called microvilli. And you guessed it, this further increases the surface area. So this is just sort of astounding here if you start thinking about how much surface area it is. And you can see here, this is our circulatory system. So as substances cross the barrier, they then travel through the body. This is important to keep in mind because we'll talk about leaky gut and the role of disease in a little bit. So let's watch this video about the gut and it being our second brain. Pretty cool, pretty important, something that I think is one of those elements that really blows how we consider the gut out of the water, right? So much more than what we think.
The brain. Every time you think, feel, or perform a multitude of unconscious processes, the 100 billion neurons in your skull conduct electrical signals to communicate and carry messages between them, ultimately creating, well, you and everything you do. It's the most complex, essential, and identifiable organ in the body, acting as the center of the nervous system in all vertebrates. But what if how you think and feel isn't just controlled by the brain and central nervous system, but in fact a second brain that you didn't know about? The brain uses the vagus nerve to connect and communicate with many parts of the body, including the vocal cords, heart, lungs, and most of the digestive tract. It also uses this nerve to convey fight or flight messages to the body, which explains why you might experience a cracking voice, racing heart, shortness of breath, and a knot in your stomach when you're really stressed or nervous. But while this extensive network is constantly sending signals from the brain to your body, scientists have noted that 80 to 90% of the nerve fibers in the enteric nervous system are actually going from the gut to the brain. In fact, the enteric nervous system, which is an extensive mesh-like network of neurons that controls your entire digestive tract from the esophagus to the anus, doesn't even require the brain at all. When the vagus nerve is severed, the enteric nervous system is capable of organizing and initiating its own reflexes for digestion because it has such a complex collection of neurons. It is your second brain and controls you far more than you realize. From an evolutionary perspective, before modern food safety protocols, our biggest choices were about eating. Is it safe? Will it make me sick? Will it give me energy? This is why we would need a direct line of communication between the gut and the brain. For example, fat and sugar are good sources of fuel for the body, so we've evolved mechanisms to notify the brain to release the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine when we eat foods high in fats and sugars, which make us continually seek them out. But the enteric nervous system becomes even more interesting when you realize that the microbes in your gut actually produce over 50% of the dopamine found in your body and 90% of the serotonin, two neurotransmitters that drastically affect your mood, happiness, and pleasure. And these microbes can manipulate your cravings and eating behaviors for their own survival. Your diet affects which bacteria thrive, but as a result, the flourishing bacteria in your gut can then send signals to the brain via the vagus nerve to tell you to keep eating the foods that they love. This is why some scientists have suggested that treatment with probiotics or fecal transplants could be an effective therapy for overeating by getting rid of certain bacteria that generate intense cravings for high-fat and high-sugar foods. In fact, current research is pointing to a gut with healthy microbiomes as a strong predictor of emotional and mental health. Mice raised in sterile environments where no bacteria could colonize their gut exhibit social traits similar to those seen in humans on the autism spectrum. When researchers studied their brains, they also found significant changes in the levels of serotonin and specific proteins related to learning and memory formation. But after feeding the mice with specific probiotics to help cultivate healthy microbiomes, the symptoms were alleviated. Their gut controlled their behavior. A 30-day study comparing people who ate probiotic yogurt found a decrease in the levels of anxiety and depression compared to people who consumed milk with no bacteria. And another study found that mice fed a specific bacteria had less stress-related hormones in their blood and performed better on tests of learning and memory. But when researchers severed the vagus nerve, all of these improvements disappeared. Again, their guts were in control of their emotions. Studies have even shown that stimulating the vagus nerve at different frequencies by implanting a small pacemaker can help patients with treatment-resistant depression by mimicking vagal nerve activity like a person with a healthy gut. And the essential role of the gut doesn't end there. Given that large social groups increase the potential for one's genes being passed on for both us and our bacteria, researchers now believe that the function of the microbiome is partly to promote pro-social behaviors. Healthy gut bacteria can lead to a higher resilience of negative emotions from others, which makes you more forgiving and better at fostering strong social connections, ultimately improving your shot at reproduction. All thanks to your second brain. Special thanks to Audible for supporting this episode to give you a free...
Are you amazed? It's pretty amazing, right? Okay, so the video talked about the microbiome. Let's talk about what that is. So majority of our DNA and our genetic information is located in our gut microbiome cells, and only about 10% of that DNA is in other cells in the body. So even just here, you can see how incredibly important that gut health is. Now, different bacteria in the microbiome affect different aspects of health. And this research truly is new and very developing. And the more they research the microbiome, the more we realize how much we don't know yet. But what they are finding is they're able to isolate certain bacteria that have an effect on emotional health. So for example, with emotional health, we find specific bacteria that affect that dopamine production or the lack of dopamine production. And it could be that, something genetic, you might have a genetic predisposition that you're making less of this type of bacteria. Same thing with specific autoimmune disorders, are able to isolate, for example, a reduced level of bacteria in something like fibromyalgia or muscular sclerosis. Sorry about that. And then also things like gut health. Now, again, this is a short list just to give you an idea. Now, the microbiome is not just the gut bacteria, but it is also the genetic makeup in the gut. Gut bacteria itself is called microbiota. Now, it's a fancy name, but you can just think about it as gut bacteria. Now, like any other bacteria, the gut bacteria grows and flourishes in the gut based on some different elements, right? So the bacteria needs a specific environment in the gut, which is very much affected by our diet and what we eat, because we feed bacteria certain things and therefore we promote the growth of that type of bacteria, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And ultimately what we're seeking to create in the gut is the proper balance between good bacteria and bad bacteria. So the more we feed it good stuff, that good bacteria will crowd out the bad bacteria, and they're sort of, think about that as sort of little warriors that will fight that bad bacteria away. Now, genetics does play a role, and medication plays a role as well. So I think the most common example would be something like antibiotics, right? Because antibiotics are designed to kill bacteria. The problem with antibiotics is they're just going to kill all the bacteria. So they're going to kill the good stuff as well as the bad stuff. Another kind of medication also may have this type of impact. Environment. When we talk about environment, we talk about external environment. So things like air quality, potential toxins and chemicals in food and water. Let's learn a little bit about leaky gut. Now, when we think about that good and bad bacteria, what we're looking at is achieving a healthy balance, right? When we get this healthy balance, then our body enjoys good health. It helps prevent certain disease risk. But when that gets out of whack, we become susceptible to all kinds of things. So as we talk about the relationship between intestinal health and these bugs, some of these conditions occur, in fact, many because of something called leaky gut syndrome. And this is where that villi and the microvilli come into play, because this is where we experience, or why we experience, leaky gut. So let's take a look.
Our intestines are lined with barrier cells, called epithelial cells, that transport nutrients from food into our bloodstream. These epithelial cells have tight junctions between them to ensure that no undigested food particles, digestive waste, or toxins escape into our blood and create health complications. Healthy epithelial cells are supported by a balanced microbiome of good and bad bacteria, which is supported by a nutrient-rich intestinal environment. Stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, and use of antibiotics can disrupt our microbiome and intestinal environment. These disruptions can lead to weak epithelial cells and loose epithelial junctions. Without tight junctions, undigested food particles, digestive waste, and toxins can leak out of our intestines and into our bloodstream, causing inflammatory immune responses, various digestive disorders, and changes to the normal function of the digestive tract. This is often called leaky gut. So what can you do about it? A nutrient-rich intestinal environment helps support a healthy microbiome, which helps support strong epithelial cells and tight epithelial junctions. Therefore, an effective way to help prevent leaky gut is to maintain a healthy, nutrient-rich intestinal environment. This can be achieved with whole food and plant-based nutritional intake, good eating habits, and lifestyle management techniques like stress reduction and exercise.
Okay, so let's take a look at an example of how this works, and we're going to use heart health for that. Now, in addition to all these other really cool things, the gut actually accounts for 40% of the total human blood. Now, that's a lot. Again, a clue as to how incredibly important the gut is. Now, by design, of course, if it stores 40% of the human blood, this also translates to oxygen stores. And we need oxygen and adequate oxygen for our organs to function properly, right? This is the first organ to experience reduced oxygen levels when there's a problem. So, for example, when you experience an asthma attack, right, we have reduced oxygen stores. If you have a respiratory problem, or you have, let's see, a broken rib and it punctures your lungs. So, especially when you have a chronic condition over time, this causes damage to that microvilli and villi environment. So remember, these are those little hair-like projections that are really important to the absorption of nutrients, etc. Now, of course, with leaky gut, then the absorption becomes problematic, because we can also absorb proteins and metabolites, basically just substances that are produced in the gut that are not so healthy, and then they're transported through the system. Now, with respect to heart disease and the risk for heart health, the body produces something called TMAO. And this has been identified as something that when released into the bloodstream, it, through leaky gut, plays a role in circulatory system damage. So why and how does our body produce TMAO? Well, it is because we have this disordered balance of our gut bacteria, and diet plays a huge role. So the scientists have also found that with consumption of meat and things like eggs and animal products, our body produces more of this TMAO, which is why diet becomes so important. So another thing, of course, is leaky gut. We can think about this as triggering or exacerbating digestive disorders like ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, and Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disorder. Now, there are, of course, many other digestive disorders, but basically the research points again to reduced bacterial diversity. And they have found in people that experience things like irritable bowel syndrome, certain bacteria that are reduced and that make them much more susceptible. So what is really important here, remember how we were talking about everything is interconnected. So let's talk about some of the repercussions, and let's start with depression. So we know that the gut plays a role in the production of hormones like dopamine and serotonin that regulate mental health, right? So if you're suffering from a chronic health condition and the production of these hormones is impacted, you're at a higher risk or perhaps much more likely to struggle with emotional health. Not only because of the reduced production of these important feel-good hormones, but also because honestly, it does not feel good to live with chronic pain. And that can obviously affect our mood and how we feel. So these new findings may explain why a higher than normal percentage of people with IBS and other functional bowel problems can develop depression and anxiety. And why do we really care about this? Well, obviously, if you're the person experiencing this, that's not fun, right? It's very unfun. But because up to 30 to 40% of the population has and experiences a functional bowel problem at some point in their life, this has really big implications on how we feel overall, right? So whether it's stress-induced and you find that for a specific time in your life, you're experiencing colitis brought on by stress, you're going to potentially experience these other side effects like depression or anxiety. So what do we eat? Well, let's start off first with just giving a disclaimer here saying I'm going to address kind of the general population, and I do want you to keep in mind that there are certain disorders and conditions that are going to be triggered or get worse by eating specific foods. So I do want you to be aware of that and mindful. And if you do have, certain conditions, you want to make sure you're going to talk to your doctor, or you perhaps already know that you want to avoid certain types of food. So I just want you to take that for what it's worth. Now, we want to eat the right foods, but we also have to take into consideration individuality, right? So we might experience food sensitivity where not the same thing as a food allergy, where we just don't feel so great when we eat something. So this could be dairy, that's very common. Gluten, again, very common. Gluten sensitivity, very different from something like celiac disease. But still, just being aware of that and mindful of that. Now, if you're at a place where you know that you don't feel quite right when you eat, but you're not really sure what that might be or what triggers it, You can speak with your doctor. They might put you on a food elimination diet, which takes away some of the most common triggers like dairy and gluten and eggs. And then you're kind of clearing your body out all of that and reintroducing these things very slowly, one at a time, to help identify them. Okay, so fiber is really important in making sure that we create a healthy gut environment. Okay, and fiber not only plays a very strong role in feeling full and therefore helps to lose weight. Fiber also helps to balance out and promote healthy cholesterol levels. But it turns out foods high in fiber also help produce probiotics, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, remember when I mentioned the production of TMAO, it's a metabolite or a substance that is produced when we eat a lot of foods that are animal-based, right? So a plant-based diet is highly recommended, either one where you're reducing meat consumption and keeping it to moderate consumption of things like chicken and fish, to a completely plant-based diet. Now, before you panic, I'm not suggesting you cut everything out, right? Back to fiber, fiber comes from multiple sources, including fruits and vegetables. So you're going to be consuming, once you start eating more fruits and vegetables, you're going to naturally be eating more fiber, so that you've got a balanced diet. Now, beans and seeds and other legumes also have some fiber, and healthy oils, nuts, and seeds also have really healthy fats. And then also consumption of fermented foods. Now, how to eat is also really important. Water is essential to the digestive process. Our gut needs water not only for organ function throughout the entire body, but especially in the gut for digestion, because with the aid of water, not only are the nutrients processed properly and absorbed, but once they reach the large intestine, that's where water starts to be absorbed back into the body, and then that waste takes a much more solid form to be then expelled from the body. And if you don't have enough water in the body, this obviously can cause some issues. Eating slowly is actually crucial, and here's why. Remember that I said that the digestive process begins as soon as you ingest food into your mouth. Eating slowly does a couple of things. First, the more we chew, the more we break down that food into smaller, well, quite frankly, mushy particles, right? And as that travels through the body, the smaller and the more chewed up, if you will, that food is, the more easily digestible it is into the body. When we don't eat slowly, when we eat quickly or we don't chew enough, our food items are larger pieces and are much more hard to digest and absorb. And oftentimes you find that it passes right through the body. And this is a problem, because if we're passing food through the body very quickly and it's not broken down properly, well, then also the nutrients are not broken down or absorbed into the body, or the important things that we're looking for, like fats and proteins and broken down forms of carbohydrates. And again, how to eat, we're going to bring up, of course, identifying food sensitivities. So I mentioned fermented foods. Fermentation is a natural process where yeast and bacteria convert carbohydrates like starch and sugar into alcohols or acids, which are actually a very good thing because they're related to probiotics. Now, fermentation itself is an ancient food preservation method because fermented food lasts a lot longer. And of course, they didn't have electricity and refrigeration, so they had to preserve their food in some way. Now, the process and commonality of eating fermented foods as part of a regular diet, of course, has really gone away because we now have other ways of preserving food, one of which, unfortunately, is using chemical preservatives. Now, if you've ever had fermented food, you know that this natural preservation process gives this food a sort of zesty, tart, sometimes sour flavor. But these foods are actually more nutritious than their unfermented form. Fermentation promotes the growth of probiotics or contain important probiotics and help balance that microbiome, right? That healthy gut bacteria balance. Now, it does have some side effects. So you could experience mild digestive kind of gas, diarrhea, bloating, and this tends to dissipate as your body becomes accustomed to getting more bacteria, and that gut balance kind of starts to even out, right? Because this is a new thing for the gut. Certain bacteria in fermented food actually produce melatonin, and this is a great example. It's a sleep hormone that helps us fall asleep, about the interconnectedness between the gut and sleep. Now, there are greater benefits in getting probiotics from food sources than from supplements. However, it can be really hard to, in this time and age, to get enough probiotics from food, and so supplementation is great. Now, if you take a look at the square on the right, here are some examples of ways that we can get incorporate fermented foods into the body. Fermented vegetables, sourdough bread contains yeast, and it gives it that, well, quite frankly, sour flavor, right? So it's because the dough has been fermented. Sauerkraut is still pretty common in the United States. And then we also have seen over the last decade or so the emergence of fermented foods that are from other cultures, like tempeh, which is fermented soy, kefir or kefir, depending on how you pronounce that. That is a fermented dairy drink. It's very much like a buttermilk, I would say. Yogurt is a great form of fermented food, and actually beer and wine are fermented. Now, it's not the end-all be-all. You've probably heard about kombucha, which has kind of emerged in the mainstream market recently, and it's kind of, you can find it at Target, you can find it anywhere, whereas before it was pretty much sort of in health food stores. And great benefits in kombucha. Now, these foods can take some time to get used to. It is sometimes for people an acquired taste. I do want you to be mindful that not all fermented foods are created equally, okay? So even if you're getting the benefit of a fermented food, some of them are really high in fat, salt, or sugar. So for example, let's take yogurt or kefir. Now, yogurt or kefir in its plain form is highly beneficial. Many people cannot really stomach that flavor, and so they'll buy the products with sweetened fruit additives. If you've ever been in the yogurt aisle recently, you can see that a lot of them look like dessert, actually, with little granola mix-ins and a lot of added sugar. So be very careful here, because remember, there are good sugars and bad sugars. Fermentation actually creates an environment with the starches and alcohols that are actually a good form of sugar that help produce the probiotics we really want. But this added sugar is sort of counterproductive to where we want to be. So just be mindful of that. again, temporary side effects from the consumption of fermented food as our bodies adjust. So probiotics can also be ingested by supplement form. The sale of probiotics has exploded on the market in the last couple of decades as well. And of course, they help and create a balanced bacteria environment in the gut. And this has a symbiotic relationship with the body. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind with probiotics. Safety, okay? You want to check with your doctor, let them know that you're thinking about probiotics. As I mentioned, some conditions should be taking certain strains of probiotics. Some types of probiotics that are soil-based are not meant to be taken long-term. If you're new, don't go crazy. Everything in moderation. It takes your gut a while to adjust to these new balances, right, between the good and bad bacteria. So you want to start with kind of a low dose. And keep in mind that, remember, certain strains of bacteria will affect certain conditions, so, or things you want to focus on. So like women's health, for example, or digestion. So as you're shopping for a probiotic, make sure that you are looking for and purchasing it for whatever condition, right, you're hoping to make better. Now, there are some that are just for general consumption for overall health. There are over 150 known benefits of probiotics that we know so far. I've chosen some here in this list because I thought they were interesting and outside of just kind of what we normally associate probiotic benefits to. So things like dental health and kidney stones and anemia and even asthma. Probiotics can help improve cholesterol, play a role in either preventing or improving symptoms of cancer. Now, again, caveat here, the science is very new. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not suggesting that you can cure cancer simply by taking probiotics, but it does play a role. Also helps or can help reduce allergies. So again, short list here. Probiotics, like fermented food, supplemented probiotics can have the same side effects as the ingestion of food. Now, I get a question a lot about refrigerated versus shelf-stable probiotics. If you've not shopped for probiotics before, and if you've gone to a health food store or like a Whole Foods or something, you will see sometimes I'll have a refrigerated section of probiotics, and then you could also buy shelf-stable probiotics that you find on the regular store shelf. And are there benefits to one or the other? Well, first, let's say that establish that probiotics are considered a supplement, and supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So unfortunately, if you purchase a bottle, there's no really sure way of knowing whether that bottle contains as much of the probiotic as it claims, and also whether that probiotic is even in the bottle. So you want to make sure and look at the labels, look for respected brands. They'll say that been evaluated and certified by an outside laboratory that have confirmed that, quite frankly, the bottle contains what it promises that it contains. Now, with refrigerated probiotics, is this better or worse? Well, something that I want you to consider is that refrigeration, and the reason one would refrigerate probiotics is that because certain bacteria is stable at certain temperatures. So if exposed to higher heat or certain other conditions, those become inactive. It can be tempting to buy refrigerated probiotics, and I'm definitely not saying that you shouldn't, but consider that in transport, right, those refrigerated jars would have to remain refrigerated and at that ideal temperature in a truck, on a train, on a plane, however they get to the store, and before they make it to the refrigerated shelves at your local market. So whether that's happening or not, we don't really know, right? Now you could throw them in the refrigerated section when it gets to the store, but how did they get there? So something to consider. Okay, so prebiotics. Probiotics, we've heard a lot about over the last few decades, but I feel like prebiotics are a little bit newish for us, right? It's just more recently that we start to hear prebiotics. And this can be a little confusing because really, what are they? Well, prebiotics are simply just food for probiotics. So remember, we talked about having the right environment and promoting the good bacteria growth. Well, we're back to food here. High fiber fruits, veggies, seeds, and certain grains. The breakdown of those carbohydrates, the starches, create this optimal environment and feed good bacteria. Prebiotics can also be found in other fortified foods like bread, cereal, or yogurt. If you take a look at the label here, this is a Kashi cereal, and you'll see circled chicory root fiber. That'll tell you that there's a prebiotic that's been fortified, that food's been fortified. Another thing you can look for is inulin. Inulin I have seen in breads. Our English muffins that we have at home have some inulin, and our fiber content. Now, here are three really, really long words that are hard to pronounce, but what you're looking for really is this word oligo, right? We see that here in all three words, and that's what you're looking for if the ingredients are listed in such a manner. That way, that clues you into the fact that there's prebiotics in that food item. Now, there are other ways to support your gut because everything is connected, right? Getting enough sleep, exercise, managing stress. Now, managing stress, that's a tricky one, right? Because we're all under stress, whether it's chronic, whether you're a caregiver, whether you have a high job stress, all kinds of reasons, or you might be going through a particularly stressful time. If you have not seen our learning series called The Stress Proof Brain, I highly recommend that you check out the recorded videos. Again, you can find those in the Wellness Classes webpage. You can certainly contact wellness@pinellascounty.org. We'll help you locate those if you can't find them. And I should also mention that we have a wonderful and extremely informative learning series about sleep called The Power of Sleep. And this will really help to start connecting the dots for you in how these things are all interrelated. Now, managing stress and mental well-being is one thing, and sometimes it's important to seek treatment for anxiety, depression in other ways. So meeting with a professional, a certified professional to sort of deal with some of these conditions. It may actually be that they recommend some type of medication as well. And there's no shame in that. There's no stigma. Sometimes that's just, necessary to feel better, but all very connected, and that helps support, a positive mental state helps to support our gut as well. So research, this is truly a new science. So constantly sort of unraveling the mysteries of the microbiome, the many, many mysteries. And as scientists learn more and more, they are isolating specific bacteria linked to certain health conditions, as I mentioned, so things like MS, fibromyalgia, asthma, obesity. Gut health plays a big role in obesity. And as they find and isolate this type of bacteria, they might test the individual for how much of this bacteria they have. And they could, as part of the treatment plan, target supplementation of the specific strain of bacteria, or they may transplant these microbes from an individual that's healthy, that has enough of these microbes, into this other individual that needs those microbes. So all kind of potential for helping to manage, to improve, to even sometimes mitigate and get rid of certain health conditions. Lots of exciting things to come in this field. So if you have any questions, I invite you to certainly email us at wellness@pinellascounty.org. Look for announcements for upcoming classes for the Microbiome Explained, for epigenetics, and also all about hunger. Thanks for joining me today.